Welcome to the inaugural episode of Recorded on a Podcast with Better Equipment, a sub-series of Helio and Bretti's Indy 500 podcast focused on Krautrock. I'm your host, Kyle Reiff. You may have heard me on some of the previous bonus episodes or pit stops on IFP, where I discussed the classic Krautrock albums Noi 75 and Can's Egibam Yassi. So if you like those episodes, stick around. On today's episode, we're going beyond the wall, the Berlin Wall that is, focusing on the Berlin School. The Berlin School is one among many Krautrock subgenres, along with Motorik, Kosmisch, and others, that came out of the prolific German music scene of the 1970s. The Berlin School in particular is a genre defined by minimalist, sequencer-driven electronic compositions, often without prominent drums. If you've heard the term Berlin School before, you've probably heard it in context of the group Tangerine Dream, and Tangerine Dream are very much the torchbearers for the Berlin School. In many ways, their music, particularly their albums Phaedra and Rubicon, define the genre. But the Berlin School and the wider Berlin music scene of the 1970s comprised a diverse group of truly innovative musicians that invented more than just a subgenre of their own. They helped to develop the building blocks for a variety of genres, including ambient, techno, new age, and house. To get started, let's jump into a little history of the West Berlin music scene of the late 1960s. Most of the cities in Germany can only claim one or two major Krautrock bands. Dusseldorf had Kraftwerk and Neu, Cologne had Can, Munich, and Amandul, and Hamburg had Faust. But the Berlin scene was particularly fruitful. Tangerine Dream, Asherah Temple, Cluster, Klaus Schulze, and Agitation Free all came out of the same scene at roughly the same time. It begs the question, what made this particular scene such fertile ground for new music? The Berlin scene had two important institutions that gave young musicians access to the tools, education, and community they needed to be successful. The first, and frankly the most important, was the electronic beat studio run by Thomas Kessler. After graduating from the Berlin Academy of Music in 1965, Kessler opened his own recording studio to pursue his interest in avant-garde composition and musique concrete. At that time, Berlin was home to just one professional recording studio, the studio at Kessler's alma mater, the Berlin Academy of Music. Unfortunately, the school's recording studio was essentially monopolized by composer Boris Blocher and rarely available to students or even visiting composers. Kessler opened a competing private studio to provide an accessible alternative to the largely unavailable Academy studio. Just a few years later, in 1967, a group of Berlin high school students would start a new and particularly noisy band called Agitation. The band very much agitated a certain Frau Franke, mother to Christopher Franke, who set out to find a remedy for her weekly headache. Frau Franke was a professional musician herself and played in Konrad Lotta's Baroque Orchestra. She wanted to support her son's passion for music, but not at the sake of her sanity. In addition to conducting the Berlin Baroque Orchestra, Konrad Lotta also happened to be the acting director at the Wilmersdorf Music School. Franke's mother approached Lotta about starting a kind of rehearsal space and music studio for young people interested in pursuing music professionally. Lotta loved the idea and procured the space, equipment, and budget from the Wilmersdorf School through a grant from the local borough council. All he needed was someone with recording experience to manage the studio. By 1967, Thomas Kessler's studio had gained a reputation as a reliable, professional studio in Berlin. Kessler had done work for John Cage, the story of which had gotten around the Berlin academic music community because Cage had been turned away from WDR and the Berlin Academy of Music before finding Kessler. Lotta had heard this story as well and thought Kessler would be a good option for the new studio. When Lotta reached out to Kessler, he was immediately on board. He quickly relocated to the Wilmersdorf space, a two-room basement studio at 32 Pfalzberger Strasse, and brought with him much of the studio equipment from his professional studio, including a number of Revox tape machines. Once established, Kessler's beat studio became very popular. Christopher Franke and the other members of Agitation Free spread the word about the studio. With full funding from the local borough council, students using the space didn't have to pay to use the rehearsal space or the recording equipment. As you can imagine, this kind of space attracted young musicians from across the city. Klaus Schulze, Edgar Froese of Tangerine Dream, and Manuel Göttsching of Asherah Temple were all frequent attendees. But it wasn't just access to the space and equipment that drew new students to the studio. It was also Kessler's mentorship and curriculum. Kessler wasn't just a passive admin booking rehearsal time, he felt strongly that his role was educational. He shared music from contemporary avant-garde composers like Steve Reich, Philip Glass, and Terry Riley. He taught the students novel composition and recording techniques using tape loops, speed manipulation, and splicing. He introduced them to audio effects, showing them how to modify the studio's tape machines to produce delay effects. And most importantly, he strongly encouraged them to be creative, to write their own music, and to not be limited by traditional pop song structures. If you listen to early albums from any one of the bands that attended sessions at the Beat Studio, you can tell that the students took Kessler's mentorship seriously. Early albums from Tangerine Dream, Asherah Temple, Klaus Schulze, and Agitation Free all completely eschew pop song structures in favor of improvised, experimental composition. These bands also showed almost none of the derivative blues influence that dominated much of the pop music coming out of the US and UK in the late 1960s. While these early albums have yet to incorporate the synthesizers and sequencers that define the Berlin School sound, Kessler had already sent his students off in the right direction with the building blocks they would need to fully realize it. In addition to the Beat Studio, there was another institution that was seminal in establishing the Berlin School, and that was the Zodiac Free Arts Lab. The Zodiac was a unique communal performance space started by Hans-Joachim Rodelius, Konrad Schnitzler, and Boris Schock. Rodelius and Schnitzler are most well known for their later collaboration with Dieter Mobius in the proto-industrial group Cluster, with a K. But in the mid-1960s, Rodelius and Schnitzler had yet to even pick up their instruments. Rodelius was a former physical therapist who had just fled East Berlin, and Schnitzler was a former marine mechanic turned art school dropout who had recently left the tutelage of Joseph Beuys at the Dusseldorf Art Academy. After deciding to leave Dusseldorf, Schnitzler reluctantly took a job as a ship mechanic on a boat headed for Corsica. While Rodelius was a qualified physical therapist in East Berlin, his qualifications weren't accepted in West Germany, and having left East Berlin with little more than the clothes on his back, he didn't have the funds to acquire the appropriate qualifications in West Germany. Desperate for money, he ended up taking a contract roofing job, oddly enough, in Corsica. Serendipitously, Rodelius and Schnitzler met in Corsica after Schnitzler decided to switch careers once again and join the same roofing crew as Rodelius. During the course of their Corsican roofing adventure, Rodelius and Schnitzler took part in cathartic after-hours drumming circles and developed the idea for a communal performance space that would become the Zodiac Free Arts Lab. Upon returning to Berlin, the two approached Peter Stein of the Schaubühne Theater Company, who offered to allow them to use the theater's basement space as long as their club didn't open until after the evening theater's program was complete, lest the noise from the club would disrupt the theater performance. As you can imagine, a communal performance space run by an eccentric former ship mechanic and an unemployed physical therapist was somewhat disorganized. In Edgar Froese's posthumous autobiography, Force Majeure, he recollects having only a few days' notice that the Zodiac was interested in having Tangerine Dream perform for the club's opening event. Upon showing up at the venue on the afternoon of the show, Froese was informed that they had forgotten to promote the event. As a last-ditch effort to draw people to the venue, Froese hand-drew a flyer featuring a cartoon topless woman from the waist up with, "Tonight, Tangerine Dream, music from a different universe, light show from San Francisco," written underneath. He managed to get to the local copy shop just before closing, and around 8 p.m. he and the Tangerine Dream guys drove around to popular local bars and clubs and threw handfuls of the flyers out of the car onto the sidewalk in front of each space. According to Froese, this guerrilla marketing tactic was hugely effective. By the time the Tangerine Dream guys got back to the Zodiac, it was completely packed. While the booking and promotion of the Zodiac was chaotic and unorganized at times, the informal and community approach also made it a safe and welcoming space to play for new experimental bands. Early iterations of Tangerine Dream, Asherah Temple, and Agitation Free all played the Zodiac. And Schnitzler especially promoted collaboration and community. Near the end of the Zodiac's winter session, Schnitzler invited members of all the club's house bands to join together as part of a Zodiac supergroup that he called Eruption. This performance included Klaus Schulze, Manuel Göttsching, members of Agitation Free, Amen Duel, and Schnitzler himself. Anecdotes about the performance imply that it was truly an eruption of sound, pure chaotic noise for over an hour. Unfortunately, the Zodiac Free Arts Lab was short-lived. While the club was a wild success and the performances were well attended, the crowd often erupted out into the street and onto the adjacent lawn of the Schaubühne Theater. Locals frequently called the police with noise, drug, and loitering complaints. And because performances often didn't start until after 10 p.m. and went until the following morning, locals would often find attendees passed out on the theater's lawn the next day. In early 1969, Peter Stein pulled the plug on the Zodiac experiment, telling Rodelius that he needed to maintain the reputation of the Schaubühne Theater, which had now started to get associated with the clientele of the Zodiac due to the shared space. With the combination of the Zodiac Free Arts Lab and the Electronic Beat Studio, the Berlin scene of the late 1960s provided the perfect conditions to foster true musical innovation. The effect of Thomas Kessler's thoughtful mentorship, free access to a rehearsal space and recording equipment through the Beat Studio, and the welcoming, supportive performance community of the Zodiac Free Arts Lab fostered a group of musicians that would go on to invent a genre and influence countless more musicians thereafter. So we've covered a bit of history around the Berlin music scene of the late 1960s, and we've established that all the major figures in the Berlin scene, Klaus Schulze, Manuel Göttsching of Asherah Temple, and Edgar Froese and Chris Franke from Tangerine Dream, interacted during their student days through the Beat Studio or playing together at the Zodiac Club. But we haven't really established much around the sonic transition from avant-garde and psychedelic influences of early albums like Tangerine Dream's Electronic Meditation and Asherah Temple's self-titled album, into the sequenced, synthesizer-driven sound of classic Berlin school albums like Tangerine Dream's Phaedra. To put it simply, synthesizer technology in the late 1960s was just too expensive for a group of teens and early 20-somethings to afford. While Kessler's Beat Studio did have professional-grade equipment, specifically Revox stereo tape machines, even Kessler didn't have access to something like a Moog 3P at the time. In Christopher Dallek's book Neuklang, Kessler mentions that he wasn't able to afford a synth himself until 1972. He saved up for a year after hearing Stockhausen's Sternklang in 1971 and special ordered an EMS Synth EA from London. Now those fact-checking kraut heads among you may be yelling, but what about Florian Frick and Popol Vuh? Isn't it true that Frick and Edgar Froese were the same age, and that Frick released his Moog 3P opus Affenstunde in 1970 at the age of 26? Yes, but Florian Frick, much like Florian Schneider, came from an extremely wealthy family. And with that, he had opportunities that the humble Berlin music community did not. Frick did, of course, share the wealth, so to speak, allowing Tangerine Dream to use his Moog on their 1972 album Sight. He also sold his Moog at a steep discount to Klaus Schulze in 1975 after becoming disillusioned with electronic instruments. Despite their lack of access to expensive, cutting-edge synthesizer technology, by 1970, Berlin groups like Tangerine Dream, Asherah Temple, and Agitation Free had established themselves in the German music community. They continued to play regularly around Berlin and were occasionally called on to open for festival dates, supporting the likes of Frank Zappa and Hawkwind. But with the exception of Tangerine Dream, none of the bands had label support or even an album out. Enter the infamous Rolf Ulrich Kaiser. Kaiser is a profoundly divisive figure from the 70s krautrock scene. On one hand, his support of the experimental German rock scene gave many bands the opportunity and financial backing they needed to push their art forward. On the other hand, his bizarre personal behavior, largely attributed to his unhinged LSD consumption, his over-the-top and sometimes cheesy marketing practices, and the predatory terms of his record deals made him very unpopular, particularly among the artists that he signed. Up until 1968, Kaiser was primarily a writer, working freelance for magazines and newspapers, and occasionally self-publishing his own books. This included a book on the international folk music scene featuring interviews with Pete Seeger and Joan Baez, published in 1967. This work inspired him to enter the music festival world, and in 1968, he began working with the city of Essen to organize Germany's first real rock music festival, International Essener Songtage. While the festival ultimately lost money, the sheer volume of money involved, nearly 300,000 Deutschmarks, piqued his interest in the music industry as a whole, and he began the process of starting a new publishing company and record label called Ohr, which translates to ear in German. Kaiser had tapped Tangerine Dream as a local opener for his music festival in Essen, and once his label was up and running, Tangerine Dream was one of the first bands he signed. Shortly thereafter, he also signed Asherah Temple and Klaus Schulze, among other psychedelic-leaning rock acts across Germany. With the support of Kaiser and the Ohr label, bands like Asherah Temple suddenly had access to state-of-the-art equipment through Ohr's network of recording studios. In Christian Wielden's Manuel Göttsching biography, he includes the following quote from Manuel about this time. Kaiser rented a studio in Cologne for a long time, and we could just be there, like being at home without a working atmosphere. Everything was there, instruments, tapes. We had a lot of fun playing all day and mostly all night, with the instruments all wired up and the tape machines rolling day and night as well. Sometimes nothing much happened, other times something we liked. It was not like a normal recording session where you had to all go in at a certain time, record, go home, and forget about it. There was no stress or pressure. We were able to go in there and play and get some experience. And not just us, but all the groups on the label. This was very good because at the time in Germany, in 1970, 1971, it was nearly impossible to get a studio. and even to get a mention of a contract was something special for German musicians. By 1971, Kaiser had established a relationship with Dieter Dierks and his Dierks studio in Stommeln, just outside of Cologne. Dierks had the most state-of-the-art studio in Germany at the time, including an EMS VCS3 synth, a Mellotron replay organ, tape delays, and a custom reverb unit. Access to Dierks' studio allowed the fledgling members of Tangerine Dream and Asherah Temple to freely experiment with this new technology and start to develop the Berlin School sound. For Tangerine Dream in particular, one specific lineup change had a huge impact on their musical direction at this time. In 1971, Chris Franke decided to leave Agitation Free and joined Edgar Froese in Tangerine Dream. Up to that point, Franke had been Agitation Free's drummer. According to Lutz Ulbrich in an interview with Perfect Sound Forever, Chris decided that he had had enough drumming and was longing for further experiences. He had substituted in Tangerine Dream sometimes already, when they did have a drummer, and he seemed to be pleased with the Tangerine Dream musical direction. So he sold his drum kit and bought a synthesizer. Chris was a fantastic drummer, and we couldn't see why he stopped playing drums, but history proved him right. In my opinion, Chris Franke's addition to Tangerine Dream is probably the single most important factor in developing the Berlin School sound. While Franke adds some live drums to Tangerine Dream's second record, Alpha Centauri, by their third record for Kaiser's Ohr label, Zeit, Tangerine Dream has fully transitioned away from live drums to a proto-ambient sound, which lays the groundwork for their first true Berlin School album, Phaedra. Froese may have been the driving force behind the band. He certainly persevered through many lineup changes from the late 1960s through the early 70s, constantly recruiting new members and booking shows and tours. But Franke was the creative force behind the band's shift to a purely electronic direction, and in particular the use of synthesizers and sequencers. Froese always maintained the desire to keep the project improvisational. His primary instrument in the studio and for live performance during the Phaedra and Rubicon era was a Mellotron, meaning that Chris Franke was responsible for ensuring that their highly temperature-sensitive synths were always in tune and that the array of sequencers, which up to that point did not have note stepping, were set to the correct notes for each performance. This would have been extremely time-consuming and difficult to maintain, especially after packing up their equipment every night during a tour. Franke was also primarily responsible for developing the relationship with Project Electronic, a Berlin-based engineering firm who he worked with to build custom solutions for syncing their drum machines and synths and developing quantized pitch-stepped sequencers for live performance. This, of course, was still a few years into the future. At the beginning of 1971, Froese still needed another band member. The Tangerine Dream lineup for Electronic Meditation was composed of Froese on guitar, Klaus Schulze on drums, and Konrad Schnitzer on cello and violin. Despite the opportunity presented by Kaiser's offer to sign to the Ohr label, Schulze and Schnitzler decided to leave the group before the release of the album. Schnitzer left almost immediately after recording the album. He and Schulze did not get along personally or artistically, and Schnitzer found the company of his companions in Cluster more on his wavelength, interested in exploring electronic, industrial noise. Schulze's consistent claim in several interviews is that Froese disliked his amateurish tape manipulations during live shows and effectively kicked him out of the band at this time. Froese claims in his autobiography that Schulze left voluntarily after a particularly uncomfortable tour date in Dusseldorf, where Schulze had brought along his new girlfriend and future wife, who Froese and his then-wife, Monica, did not get along with. At any rate, Kaiser wanted a follow-up to Electronic Meditation and was offering Froese essentially unlimited recording time at Dieter Dierks' state-of-the-art studio. Froese had successfully recruited Chris Franke from Agitation Free, but needed one more musician. As luck would have it, the universe found his new band member for him, or at least that's how Steve Schroeder tells it. In Christoph Dahlek's book Neuklang, Steve Schroeder gives a full recollection of his joining Tangerine Dream. It goes roughly like this. Schroeder hears Electronic Meditation in a record shop in Berlin and asks the store clerk if they have Froese's address. Bizarrely, they claim they do, and they write it down for him. He immediately goes to the address, but it turns out that it's actually Klaus Schulze's house, and Schulze informs him that he's no longer in the band, but he can give him Edgar's address, which he does. At this point, it's quite late at night, but undeterred, Schroeder walks over to Froese's house and rings the doorbell sometime after midnight. Upon hearing the doorbell, Froese pops his head out of the second-story window and asks, "Who's there?" Schroeder's reply, "Your new organist appointed by the cosmos." Froese invites him in and immediately invites him to join the band. Dahlek's book has a number of additional bizarre anecdotes about Schroeder, who is a fun but wildly unpredictable character. It's not a huge surprise that he only lasted with Tangerine Dream for one album. He was quickly replaced with the more reliable Peter Baumann, who completes the classic Tangerine Dream lineup. Let's jump forward to 1973. By the end of 1973, between the Ohr and Cosmic Courier labels, Kaiser has released the first 4 Tangerine Dream albums, the first 5 Asherah Temple albums, and the first 2 Klaus Schulze albums. None of which would be considered Berlin School albums, but his support allowed these bands to further develop their sound and get access to the cutting-edge music technology through Dieter Dierks' studio, a studio which was continually getting updated with the latest gear, including the latest synthesizers. From January to May of 1973, Kaiser and Dierks would throw a number of studio jam sessions aimed at, well, depending on who you ask, either introducing Ohr's signed bands to the new gear available at the studio, or taking advantage of the cosmic power of the full moon. I'll let you decide who said what. These jam sessions included Klaus Schulze, Harold Grosskopf, who was then playing with Asherah Temple, Manuel Göttsching, Dieter Dierks, and Jürgen de Lassa of Wallenstein. As was Kaiser's predilection at the time, he insisted that all participants take LSD prior to partaking in the sessions, and tape was kept rolling throughout the sessions so that everyone could listen back to the jams. There are many versions of the story that unfolds after these sessions. Klaus Schulze claims that he never provided consent for the sessions to be released in any way, and fully understood the event to be purely a jam session meant for participating musicians to explore the new studio equipment available at Dierks' studio. In contrast, Manuel Göttsching claims in an interview with Christian Wielden in Deep Distance that he was fully informed that the intention behind the sessions was to release them on the Cosmic Courier's label, and that he was paid a small advance for his attendance. From his perspective, it was an extension of the Walter Wegemuller sessions for the Tarot album, which took place in December of 1972, and also included Schulze. The story of the Tarot album is too long to go into here, but I would implore you to check it out. It's possible that both stories are true, that Kaiser knew that Göttsching would be more open to the idea and informed him in advance, while he kept Schulze in the dark. Either way, Kaiser released 4 albums worth of edited jam session material on the Cosmic Courier label under the band name Cosmic Jokers. These albums have quirky names like Galactic Supermarket, Planetary Sit-In, and Sci-Fi Party, and all 4 records were released simultaneously in 1974. The release of these albums would effectively be Kaiser's downfall and the end of his career in the music industry. While not involved in the Cosmic Jokers sessions, Edgar Froese from Tangerine Dream had recently been courted by Virgin Records and was seriously considering their offer. Tangerine Dream had been gaining popularity in the UK, stemming from John Peel's frequent airplay of their album Zeit, and now 3 albums into his contract with Ohr, Froese was beginning to realize that he had signed a bad deal with Kaiser. Hearing Schulze's horror story about the Cosmic Joker sessions, and seeing what he considered to be somewhat cheesy promotion for the records, was the last straw for him. Froese formally sued Ohr to break Tangerine Dream's contract in 1974, claiming that Kaiser was no longer mentally fit to run the label. Shortly thereafter, Schulze also sued Ohr and Kaiser for releasing the Cosmic Joker's material without his permission. The combination of these lawsuits, and Kaiser's general mental decline in light of his use of LSD, eventually led to him losing both cases. As a small aside about Kosmische Musik and the Cosmic Courier's label, I've always found the general negativity from Froese and Schulze, and others, particularly around the Cosmic Courier's name, to be pretty odd. There's a hilarious interview with Steven Wilson of Porcupine Tree, speaking with Klaus Schulze, where he asks Schulze's opinion on the Cosmic Courier's sessions and label, and Schulze replies that he hated even the name, let alone the music, saying specifically, "I'm not some kind of cosmic postman." This is especially funny because Schulze actually did work as a postman in the early 70s. Perhaps Schulze just had bad associations from his time in the Postal Service, but I've always interpreted the name differently, as kind of a cosmic messenger, which I don't find that cheesy. I find Cosmic Jokers to be much more cheesy, and I agree that album titles like Galactic Supermarket certainly have a silly air to them. That said, it's not entirely divorced from the aesthetic being used by American funk bands like Parliament Funkadelic during the Mothership Connection era. All to say, I actually like these records a lot, and I think they're a great example of psychedelic space rock from this era. I fully understand that Froese and Schulze had personal issues with Kaiser over their contracts and the unhinged marketing copy he was using to promote the records. And I can imagine, as driven musicians trying to make a living from their art, it was difficult to leave your financial future up to a guy who was constantly taking acid. But I think their opinions on these records are very much colored by their distaste for Kaiser as a person, and less on the objective qualities of the music produced. That brings us to 1974. This year is very much the turning point and the beginning of the true Berlin School period for Tangerine Dream. The band received a sizable advance in signing to Virgin Records, enough to finally afford a Moog 3P, which Franke bought from the Hansa recording studio for just $15,000, a supposed bargain for the time. They also purchased a number of other new instruments, including an EKO rhythm controller, a mini Moog, and a phaser. Froese had purchased a Mellotron after the Atem sessions, and all three members now had EMS VCS3s. The Moog 3P in particular would be the key. With its extremely versatile sequencer module, the band could bring rhythm back into their compositions without using explicit drum sounds. With their signing to Virgin, Tangerine Dream also received discounted studio time at Virgin's own studio called The Manor. The studio was so named because it was located in a remote manor house in Oxfordshire in England. While this sounds like a quaint and relaxing atmosphere in which to record a groundbreaking proto-ambient record, anecdotes surrounding the recording make it sound like a fairly fraught experience. The band arrived at the Manor ready to record. They had done pre-production work in advance of the sessions. The pre-production sessions were later released as the Green Desert album in 1986. Unfortunately, the Manor wasn't ready for them. The building itself was exactly what you might expect from a Victorian-era English manor house, and it was very much in disrepair. In addition, the equipment in the studio, while generally sufficient, hadn't been maintained well, and the entire first day of sessions was spent with the house engineer trying to resolve a crackling sound in the monitor that was later attributed to a bad channel in the mixing desk. During the second day, the entire studio lost power due to a municipal rolling blackout, and the third day it rained, but in the studio, so the team at the manor house spent the day roofing instead of engineering their session. If only they had still had Konrad Schnitzer, right? Despite the numerous setbacks, at the end of the first week, Franke hit on a truly iconic sequence during their morning session. In Froese's autobiography, he notes that Franke started the sequence while they were still prepping, and the tapes hadn't started rolling. He was worried that they wouldn't be able to recapture the patch if they didn't record it, so he ran over to Franke and grabbed him around the arm so he couldn't change the patch before the tape machine was turned on. Franke was expectedly startled, and it actually caused quite a row until Bauman came in to defuse things and talk through the key of the sequence. The sequence in question is the first sequence from the title track on Phaedra, and as noted in Froese's autobiography, the live pitch shift up on the sequence after the first minute or so of the track is actually due to the fact that Franke hadn't yet tuned his oscillators prior to Froese grabbing him. So the sequence started in between the keys of B and C. Franke had to shift the pitch of the oscillator up slightly so that the sequence would play in tune with Froese's Mellotron later in the track. You can also hear how temperature sensitive the oscillators on the early Moog modular systems are. Just 9 minutes into the track, Franke's sequence is already drifting flat, and you can hear him again trying to retune the oscillator in real time. Phaedra was by far Tangerine Dream's most successful album up to that point. The album went gold in 7 countries and entered the UK album charts at number 15, something unheard of from a German electronic instrumental group at that time. With Phaedra, Tangerine Dream was finally able to merge their various influences and experiences into a coherent new sound. Textural and avant-garde influences from Ligeti and Stockhausen, already present on previous Tangerine Dream albums like Zeit and Atem, merge with minimalist elements from Steve Reich and Philip Glass, and are realized with modern new equipment from Moog, EMS, and Mellotron. With Phaedra, Froese and company knew that they had hit on a winning formula. They continued to use Phaedra as a blueprint for their next 3 records, Rubicon, Stratosphere, and their soundtrack work for William Friedkin's Sorcerer. I think it's fair to say that Klaus Schulze was closely monitoring the output of his former bandmate, because while Schulze's output from Irrlicht in 1972 to Picture Music in 1975 shows continued compositional development, he doesn't begin to incorporate sequencing technology until shortly after Phaedra's release. From his 1975 album Time Wind and onward, sequencing becomes a prominent aspect of his music. That said, Schulze still couldn't afford a Moog 3P at this time. He purchased a standalone Synthenorma SQ312 to sequence his ARP 2600 for the sequences on Time Wind, which is considered Schulze's first true Berlin School album. Manuel Göttsching is the last to join the Berlin School sound, but arguably one of the most influential in the long run. Göttsching's best friend and long-term Asherah Temple collaborator, Hartmut Enke, decided to leave the band after the Join In album in 1973. Enke had overindulged in the rockstar lifestyle coming out of the 7-Up sessions with Timothy Leary, and at that point had had enough of the music industry. Klaus Schulze left Asherah Temple the same year to pursue his solo career in light of his success with Irrlicht and getting his own recording contract with Ohr. Göttsching tries to carry on with the Starring Rosie album, recruiting Harold Grosskopf, whom he met through the sessions at Dierks' studio, but Grosskopf couldn't commit long-term because of his commitments with his primary band, Wallenstein. In the end, Göttsching decides to record his next album alone. By 1974, Kaiser's relationship with Dierks' studio has dissolved, but he's still pushing Göttsching to record another album for the Cosmic Courier label, as Göttsching was one of the few artists who was not suing him coming out of the Cosmic Joker sessions. Göttsching suggests to Kaiser that he help him build his own studio for the project, which he went on to call Studio Roma. Kaiser agreed and procured him a Teak 4-track tape machine and a Revox stereo tape machine to get him started. While Tangerine Dream and Klaus Schulze had managed to negotiate new, lucrative contracts in 1974 to afford new instruments, Göttsching was still stuck in a bad contract with Kaiser and didn't have the discretionary income to buy new cutting-edge equipment. Fortunately, that didn't deter him. Inspired by his mentor Thomas Kessler and the minimalist composers he introduced him to, he set out to record an album that is essentially an homage to the likes of Steve Reich, Philip Glass, and Terry Riley. The result is 1975's Inventions for Electric Guitar. The entire album was recorded using just 4 tracks of electric guitar with minimal effects. At this time, Göttsching's home studio included just his 1961 Gibson SG Special, a lap steel guitar, a fuzz box, a shallow rotosound, a wah-wah, and a Revox tape machine used as a tape delay. Given these limitations, Göttsching is profoundly creative. He coaxes a huge array of tones from his guitar, like using the volume knob to create synth-like swells on tracks like Quasar Sphere. The effect is so convincing you'd be forgiven for believing he must have used a synth. The album is also a celebration of Göttsching's guitar ability. According to Wheeldon's Deep Distance, Göttsching recorded each track as a single performance without overdubs or loops. Between the tight timing, interplay between tracks, and the duration of each song, the performances are truly incredible. While his contemporaries were using sequencers as a means of replicating the hypnotic repetition of influences like Steve Reich, Göttsching was able to achieve it manually in performance. Inventions for Electric Guitar is technically, due to the instrumentation, not a Berlin School album, but it is very much Göttsching's first attempt at the style given his financial constraints at the time. Inventions for Electric Guitar is Göttsching's last for Kaiser. By the end of 1974, all of Kaiser's imprints, Ohr, Pills, and Cosmic Couriers, have been dissolved due to legal issues with Edgar Froese and Klaus Schulze, and the ensuing fallout with his financial partner Peter Meisel. Free from his contract with Kaiser, Göttsching is free to explore other musical opportunities. His first venture is to score the soundtrack for Philippe Garrel's film, The Crystal Cradle. The advance for this project allowed him to purchase some additional instruments, including an EKO computer rhythm, a Farfisa synth orchestra, and an EMS Synth A. With these new tools, Göttsching was finally ready to produce his true Berlin School album, New Age of Earth. For New Age of Earth, Göttsching decided to focus more on electronics, and in particular composing from keyboard instead of guitar. In working with synths closely for the first time on the Crystal Cradle soundtrack, he found that composing from a keyboard versus guitar pushed him into different melodic territory. In an interview with Wheeldon for Deep Distance, Göttsching says, "I found out some interesting things, that I could get different ideas musically on a keyboard playing than I had on a guitar because it's a different instrument and you think different. How to play it, how to play chords, how to play melodies, how to play rhythms." In the same interview, he speaks to his intentions to make the record more electronic, saying, "I collected a few things, an organ and a small synthesizer, so I said to myself, now's the time to use this. It was a very new thing for me because I had never worked with electronics so strongly before, but I was interested in the sounds and the possibilities to develop. It took a long time, with finding a new record company and all." New Age of Earth is often considered one of the most influential albums on the development of the ambient music genre, and is considered one of the core examples of the Berlin School style. Göttsching never really returns to the genre over the course of his career. With his 1977 follow-up album Blackouts, he incorporates live drums and significantly more guitar. The compositions are still largely electronic, but not generally considered Berlin School. His groundbreaking 1981 album, E2-E4, is often considered the first techno album, and is cited as hugely influential for artists like Carl Craig and The Orb. That said, Göttsching only briefly dipped his toes into the Berlin School, but he does leave us with one of the defining albums of the genre. There's just one more album and artist I'd like to cover, and that's Michael Honig's departure from the Northern Wasteland. Honig, like all the artists from the Berlin School, studied with Thomas Kessler at the Electronic Beat Studio. He was one of the early members of Kessler's Scratch Orchestra, and after that experience, began to experiment with synthesizers and other keyboard instruments. After Chris Franke and Axel Genrich left Agitation Free in 1971, Ulbrich recruited Honig, George Schwenke, and Burkhard Rausch to complete the lineup in preparation for their famous Middle East tour. Honig remained with Agitation Free until their first breakup in 1974. Honig was recruited to briefly stand in for Peter Baumann in Tangerine Dream during their Australian tour in 1975, and then subsequently joins Klaus Schulze in a short-lived and confusingly named collaboration called Time Wind, which is weirdly totally unrelated to Schulze's album of the same name. In 1976, Honig connects with Manuel Göttsching, who asks to use his home studio mixing console to mix down New Age of Earth. During this time, Honig and Göttsching worked collaboratively on a Berlin School style album titled Early Water that they decide not to release at the time. It was eventually released in 1995 by Musique Intemporale in Germany and by Spalix in France. As you can imagine, after the whirlwind of Berlin School exposure Honig experiences from 1975 to 1977, working with Tangerine Dream, Klaus Schulze, and Manuel Göttsching, it was inevitable for him to make his own Berlin School album. And he did just that in 1977, recording his take on the genre as Departure from the Northern Wasteland. That would be Honig's last effort for nearly a decade. 1987's Except One is also very much in the Berlin School style. Honig also has the honor of being one of the first artists to coin the name of the genre in print, doing so in Synapse magazine, Volume 5, Issue 2, in the spring of 1978. Synapse was an electronic music magazine published in LA from 1976 to 1979. They did album reviews, interviews, and equipment reviews, in addition to newsworthy coverage about gear, concerts, and bands using synthesizers in the late 1970s. Interviewer Doug Liner tells Honig that he feels like his record, Departure from the Northern Wasteland, is likely to be compared to Tangerine Dream, Klaus Schulze, and Jean-Michel Jarre. He also asks him what common influences he has with those groups that would lead to such comparisons. Honig explains that Tangerine Dream, Klaus Schulze, and Ashrah Temple could be described as members of the Berlin School of Electronic Music, which was influenced by their experience in the Berlin music scene of the late 60s and early 70s. I think that really covers everything you could possibly want to know about the Berlin School. Here's just a brief summary of what we covered today so far. The Berlin School, as a genre, is defined by sequencer-driven electronic instrumentation using minimal percussive elements. All of the luminaries of the genre came out of the music scene in Berlin in the late 1960s. They all studied with the so-called father of the Berlin School, Thomas Kessler, at the Electronic Beat Studio in Berlin. Kessler exposed them to the avant-garde and minimalist classical composers Stockhausen, Ligeti, Reiff, Glass, and Riley, and influenced them to write their own music, free of the compositional limitations of pop music. The primary groups coming out of the scene were Tangerine Dream, Ashrah Temple, Agitation Free, Cluster, and Klaus Schulze. Initially, the majority of the band started out creating psychedelic, rock-influenced compositions. With label support from Ore and Virgin Records, the bands got access to cutting-edge synthesizer technology, and with access to sequencers like the one found in the Moog 3P, bands like Tangerine Dream were able to incorporate minimalist elements like those from Steve Reich without having to play the sequences manually. Tangerine Dream's groundbreaking album Phaedra would inspire their peers like Klaus Schulze, Manuel Göttsching, and Michael Honig to explore sequencers and synthesizers in their compositions, which resulted in the development of the Berlin School sound. The Berlin School would go on to influence future electronic musicians and influence the development of genres like ambient, techno, new age, and house. Alright, now that we've got some context around the genre, let's listen to some tunes with Helio.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Kyle. This is Helio joining in now for some of the fun. You curated a pretty amazing playlist for us to give us a good overview of the Berlin School stuff. And man, I can tell you, I am absolutely enamored with it. It's kind of that music that I always love, those parts of like the Pink Floyd type sound where it's the ambient, long drawn out compositions. Even like the modern post-rock type stuff. So this really speaks to me, and that cinematic kind of almost score to life type feel that the music's doing here, as well as, the way they use the instruments on some of the stuff. One of the tracks later down the playlist, we'll talk about from Göttsching, he's doing some of the ideas from the music with guitars. The idea is to step outside of the box a little bit and give it that synth feel with guitar. So really a ton of creativity going on here. I wonder if you want to introduce kind of the first section you set up for us.
Sure, yeah. So I thought it'd be great for us to do like a little like listen and react. So the first section is going to be focused on Tangerine Dream. They're, the forebearers of the genre. And what I really wanted to highlight in like the first section is just like how far away from the Berlin School they started. So to jump in, let's start with a Tangerine Dream song from their very first album, Electronic Meditation. It's called Journey Through a Burning Brain. And it's reflective of, more of that kind of industrial cluster vibe. It kind of harkens to some of the psychedelic music that's coming out of the UK at the time, thinking Pink Floyd, sort of like Syd Barrett era.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, hit it. Let's play that one.
Yeah, so for those keeping track at home, it is a 12.5-minute song, and just kind of wanted to give you a taste of the evolution of it. Definitely, like, yeah, it immediately conjures up those Syd Barrett, imagery, like the famous story of him taking way too many hits of LSD and just sitting on stage, strumming a C chord for like 29 minutes, one night.
Oh, yeah.
Just let's make noise, let's have fun with it, and let's see where it goes. And no, yeah, it's amazing to think this is where they started to where they wind up like 2-3 years later, let alone 20 years later,
or even a year later. I mean, like, I feel like that the trio of that record is they don't like each other at all. Froza is just like trying to pull something together because he's got money from Kaiser, and they're all friends with Konrad Schnitzler because he's running the Zodiac, and it's just like, all right, well, let's just throw something together. They record it. I think it's supposedly they recorded it in one take in a warehouse, and it's just like they're like, and there's so many interviews with like Klaus Schulze where he talks about how much of a joker he thinks Schnitzler was, that he like showed up to the recording session with like a shelf full of like random like trash. That he was going to like shake in front of microphones and stuff. So, I mean, and I don't think it sounds that way. I think it sounds quite good, actually. I think it has, it definitely is like a ramshackle version of Syd Barrett era Pink Floyd. I don't think, I mean, and I would even say that like Schnitzler's cello and violin parts like make sense in context of the composition. Like it doesn't feel like whacked out or anything. I don't know how much of his like weird trash on the shelf got on the record. I mean, maybe not that much, but yeah, it's actually a pretty decent record. I know like Froza doesn't talk about it super positively in like later interviews, and obviously like they're a million miles away from that in the future,
right?
But yeah,
it's kind of the we were just dumb kids album, right there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they were like Klaus Schulze at that time has got to be like maybe 19. I don't think he's even 20 yet.
Yeah, plenty of time to go then.
And then so the next track that we pulled up is from Alpha Centauri. It's called Ultima Thule Part 1, and this is going to show. So at this point, we've lost Schnitzler, we've lost Schulze. Kaiser is still throwing money at Edgar Froza and saying, like, give me another record, man. He recruits Christopher Franke from Agitation Free, who at this time is still a drummer. He's not playing synth at this time. And then they've also got, I think Steven Schroeder is actually on the record but uncredited, and then it's credited to Peter Baumann, who I don't think actually plays on the record. But this track in particular is like, you can tell how much better Christopher Franke is as a drummer than Klaus Schulze. He's incredible on this. I mean, he's playing like 180 BPM, just like crazy, just drumming underneath it. And Schroeder, for all as wacky as he is, like as a person, and like some of the stories about him, the like flanged organ stuff on this track is incredible. So yeah, let's give folks a taste of this one, Ultima Thule.
Yeah. Yeah, that so one, I mean, you start getting the prog feel and, very solid musicianship, as well as, still kind of the out there ideas.
Yeah, which is awesome. I feel like this track is one of those things where it's like, I'm always like, why didn't they do more of that? Like, Alpha Centauri as a record as the whole, like, the first couple tracks are actually, like, pretty, like, down-tempo, honestly, like, a little bit more like the next record, Zeit. It's just Ultima Thule that has Christoph Franke playing drums on it, and it goes into like that really cool freak out territory. it almost feels like they're kind of replying in that moment to the Ashra Temple stuff. Like, it's very much more in the vein of like Join In era Ashra Temple, or I would say that era, because the early on Klaus Schulze is still not that great of a drummer, and by Join In, like he's kind of like dialed it in and he sounds good. And I think Christopher Franco was like, he was always there, right? He was good in Agitation Free. He's good in this iteration of Tangerine Dream.
Yeah, was he more of like a formally trained musician, or because he definitely seems to have pretty strong chops?
He was just, German kid learning to play the drums. I think it's just like the Agitation Free kids. They were part of the Electronic Beat Studio, and they just like played relentlessly. They were the kind of, they were always jamming together, always playing. Actually, all the kids that came out of that are really strong players, and it's got to be that community of kids just like pushing each other forward kind of thing. Because Göttsching has really great chops. Lul from Agitation Free has really good chops. Christopher Franco, obviously. All the guys that came out of that, including to a certain extent, what's his name? Michael Honig as well. Is actually a really good keyboard player. So I think that it's just like that community of kids pushing each other forward and getting better. Klaus Schulze is part of that. He talks about going to the Beat Studio and stuff like that, but he wasn't part of like the Agitation Free crew.
Right.
So the next thing, and we don't have to listen to a clip of this one because honestly, it's probably like the most down tempo of the stuff. It's called, on the playlist though, it's called Birth of Liquid Pleiades. I guess I'm assuming that's how you say it.
I think that's it. Yeah.
I've never heard Edgar say it, so this track is interesting because it's the first album where Christopher Franco decides he's not playing drums anymore. He's started to just transition over to synth, and this whole record is just like a drone album essentially.
Yeah.
It's 20 minutes of drone. The other cool thing about this record is that Florian Frick of Popol Vuh is playing his gigantic Moog on this. So is he doing anything like really groundbreaking? Not really. It's like a decent drone record, but nothing to write home about. But definitely like an interesting path for them, because especially if you're hearing Ultima Thule before this. If you're like a record buyer, 1970, you picked up Alpha Centauri, and you're like, oh my god, dude, this last track is amazing. I hope they do this for the next record.
Yeah.
And you pick this up, and you've heard Florian Frick is on it. You heard the first Popol Vuh record, and you're thinking like, okay, that was like just crazy whacked out sound effects. Like that's gonna be awesome in context of like that kind of Ashra Temple jamming kind of stuff. And then you get this record, you're probably a little let down. You're probably a little like, what is this?
A bit of a different energy, but it just goes to show like how diverse they were in their ideas and their music. Quickly, you can go from that rock out to this meditative drone stuff, and then you never know what you're going to get with them.
True. I guess that's a cool part of it, that you're getting introduced to all these kind of genres that maybe you wouldn't have gone to seek out. And I guess that's kind of the vibe in the 70s though too, right? Even with like labels, the idea that like Popol Vuh, Ashra Temple, Tangerine Dream, they're all in the same record label. They're all signed by Kaiser, and they're all profoundly different sounds. Even though like we've in 2025 have kind of grouped them all into Krautrock. They
one convenient umbrella. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So I would say, if you're listening out there, check out the album Zeit by Tangerine Dream, just to get a feel for that transition from like freak out stuff to the kind of middle period of droney stuff that they did. There's another record that comes after Zeit that's called Atem that is in the same style, where they're continuing to do the droning stuff. But the real breakout record for them is Phaedra. And we talked, I talked earlier on the podcast about, the title track and some of the interesting stuff coming out of that. But what I want to play here is the track Movements of a Visionary. This one, I think, even more so than the title track, kind of captures the Berlin School style. It is not hampered with the kind of technical issues that popped up for Phaedra. And I think I would say that the sequences on this are more musical. And I think it's a better standout track to me than Phaedra. So let's throw on a little bit of that. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
I love that record. I love that track is awesome.
Now, is that where Kosmish kind of starts becoming like a defined sound? I mean, because for me, it definitely conjures up, the deep space satellites flying by the stars and all those things. Is that kind of where that label came in?
It isn't, actually. It came in before. So the Kosmish thing comes out of Kaiser's like marketing material. So like the Cosmic Couriers label is where like Kosmish gets coined in context of the German scene, and it's actually like really controversial. If you see interviews with Klaus Schulze, even Manuel Göttsching, Michael Honig, they all disliked that label because it was associated with Kaiser. They all hated him so much because of what happened like at the later end of the label, where he wasn't paying them out anymore. He was giving them really paltry advances. He's taking acid constantly, like not really following through on stuff. But the first couple records out of like the Krautrock German scene that get the Kosmish label are those first couple Cosmic Couriers records, like the Cosmic Jokers record, the Tarot record, stuff like that. That's where the label comes from. I think like this later stuff that has like the sequencing, maybe people were still calling it Kosmish, I'm not sure. But because even like the Berlin School coinage doesn't come until way later. It doesn't come till like 78 or so. So yeah, I don't know what people were calling this. Cool electronic music, I guess.
Exactly. Groundbreaking, I think, for sure. And yeah, I mean, just the interplay of all these things without all the traditional instruments, but it's still making this wonderful composition, everything through computers and digital ideas. And I love this one.
Yeah. Like the idea that they didn't need the drums. And I guess like that's what Franca's vision was like all along. I don't know what he had access to. I know that like there's a lot of talk about him going to a studio in Hamburg where he eventually buys the Moog 3P that they use on this record on Phaedra, and having access to the sequencer there. And I know that there's a funny story actually about Klaus Schulze going to Florian Frick's house when he goes to buy the Moog 3P from him in like 74 or 75. I think it's more like towards 75 because he doesn't end up using it on Moon Dawn. He uses it on the record after that, I think. And Klaus Schulze knows that Florian got like the four-piece setup. I guess like there's a photo of it on one of the records, on one of the early Popol Vuh records, and he goes, he brings his like advance from Virgin or whatever. I think he pays him like 25,000 Deutschmarks or something, and he gives him like the 3 cases that are associated with like the oscillators and the envelopes and stuff like that. And Schulze is like, "No, dude, there's another case. Where's the sequencer case?" and Frick's like, "Oh yeah, there was a case, but it just made weird pulsing sounds. Are you sure you want that? And Schulze is like, yeah, dude, it's the sequencer. Yeah, it's like a $10,000 thing. Yeah. So he like runs down into the basement and he's like, oh yeah, here it is. Here's this thing, and like I think that's very. It's a telling story of one Frick feeling like, who needs a sequencer? I can play it, because he was such a virtuoso. But also him not necessarily understanding like the possible like musical value of that, or maybe he just really felt like, if I'm going to play something like repetitive like that, I can just play it to tape and then it doesn't matter. Whereas I think, Franca in visiting, the studio starts with an H, I forget what it is, but I think in visiting that studio and messing around with that, like he really sees like the potential of it moving forward. He just doesn't have the money to bring it to the studio with Dierks or anybody like that.
It's definitely like a really solid rhythmic device as well. Not for somebody like the drums trying to transfer away from having to hit on stuff. Like that sequencer is going to keep everything in sync, lined up really well. And I mean, they do a good job of layering it in. So there's still the conventional music parts of there's our beat, there's our melodies, there's our leads, there's kind of everything we need for a full song, but this completely new instrumentation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, I think like his vision, even more so than Froza's, is really what kind of pushes them forward. And then the next track we have on the playlist is Part 1 from Ricochet, and not sure if you guys can hear that plow coming down. We're in snowpocalypse over in Philly here. But anyway, the reason I put this on the list is because it shows now. There are. I think now it's confirmed that like Part 1 of Ricochet has a lot of overdubs on it. Part 2 does not, but I think it's equally valuable in listening to. But the idea that like at this time, if you saw Tangerine Dream, they were so dialed in with the technology that they were able to improvise on the fly with the sequencers, with the oscillators, and nobody is doing this at this time. Like nobody in 74, 75 is traveling, touring, playing with sequencers that have a lot of there's a lot of work that goes into tuning the oscillators, setting up all the sequencers so that they're like on the notes. Because keep in mind, like they're playing with a mellotron. So a mellotron it's like a tape organ where each key is tied to an individual piece of tape that plays back like a violin sound or a flute sound. And it's calibrated in such a way that like it's in A440. So when you crank up the synthesizer, if the synthesizer is a little bit out of tune, you can't solo on your mellotron over the sequence.
It's gonna sound like shit.
Yeah. So everything is like really dialed in, and it's not just like Franca taking 2 hours before every show to tune all the oscillators. He does, at one point he reaches out to a place in Berlin called Project Electronic that builds them a bunch of like kind of tools to really quickly transpose the sequencers for voltage, like going up an octave or down an octave, going up a third, going down a third, and stuff that he can use to like really quickly improvise on the fly with some of the technology that they had. But that being said, they're so ahead of the curve on the technology side that like this Ricochet album, and knowing that it was a live album and knowing that they had improvised it, would have been like a really cool thing at the time. And I think like listening to it in that context really puts you in a headspace where it's like wow, these guys were really cutting edge, doing really cool stuff that nobody at this time is really accomplishing. Like even think about a band like Pink Floyd, 72, Dark Side comes out. They're using sequencers, right? So they're using On the Run. They've got an EMS synthy sequencer, but they're not improvising over it, right?
No.
It's just the sequencer running. It's a lot of percussive sounds going over top of it, but nothing melodic. And so to think that like even Pink Floyd wasn't really ready to start improvising over sequenced melodies at that time really shows you like how far they had gotten.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm putting myself in that headspace of being up on stage, you know, experimenting and like essentially jamming with these things, and it's terrifying. Like, I mean, this equipment is so cool and foreign in so many ways, but these guys, like, to what you said, totally masters of it, just dialed in. And I mean, the fact that they're showing up with this pretty, I don't know, new schizophrenic at times technology and accomplishing these things is just like astounding.
Yeah. And I mean, like, if you want to like check out more detail on some of the the harrowing experiences it can be like to tour with this kind of equipment, Edgar Froese's autobiography, it's called Force Majeure. It you know, there's probably 3 or 4 chapters of like the worst possible things that could happen to them over time. Everything from on their Australian tour, they hired a custom like shipping group to ship all the synthesizers to Australia, knowing that it was going to be fraught with these kind of things. Mm-hmm. They built custom cases to ship the things over that had like arrows on them saying like this side up and all this kind of stuff. The main case with the power supply in it that has the transformer, which is like, you know, 30-40 pound transformer, case was shipped upside down, even though it had arrows on the case, and the transformer fell through the entire case, smashing all the circuit boards on the way down. So they had to play like the first 4 dates of the Australian tour without the sequencer or really like the Moog at all. I think they managed to get some other synthesizers to play like live to it, and I think Froese talks about having to go to like some radio station with like a multi-track of the Phaedra album, and he gets like them to overdub like the bass lines from a couple of the tracks, and they're using them as the sequence instead of playing it live on the Moog. And they just like, there's a lot of talk about them like trying to solder the circuit boards back together while they're on tour.
Jeez.
I mean, so like, they didn't
still
really
sounds
run
like
into
really clever. Yeah, I mean, even to think to go to the radio station and do that kind of thing.
Oh, true. Yeah. I mean, like, I was when I was reading that, and I was like, oh my god, like, what are they gonna do?
Right.
So yeah, super clever solution for sure. I mean, they were like a top 10 band at that time. I think Phaedra was like, top 10 on the Australian album charts. That's why they ended up doing the tour.
And it was like 15 in the UK as well, right? I mean, it landed pretty big. Yeah,
I think maybe top 12. I think it was number 12 or something on the UK album charts. So yeah, really good for them. So I think we're gonna switch gears here on the playlist and jump to some Klaus Schulze stuff. And I think we'll share the playlist with everybody at home. But the next 2 tracks are kind of like Klaus Schulze trying to pin down the same vibe as Tangerine Dream on Zeit and Atem. The first track is from his album Irrlicht. It's called Quadrophonische Symphonie for orchestra, Satz Ebene, and basically it is, I mean, honestly, like, I think that Irrlicht is a better drone album than Zeit, and it comes out like right at the same time. So I don't think, at this point, I don't think Klaus is necessarily deriving stuff from Tangerine Dream. I think he's just influenced by the same stuff. Yeah. And I would go so far to say that like the live cello and like orchestra stuff that Tangerine Dream's using on Zeit doesn't sound as good as like the tape manipulated stuff that Schulze is using on Irrlicht. I think the textures that he gets on Irrlicht are way more interesting than what Tangerine Dream comes up with at the same time. So I think like if you're into that kind of drone stuff, it's worth listening to some of these early Klaus Schulze records, because he's using tape in a cool way that some of his contemporaries aren't for whatever reason. And then the next track is called Bayreuth Return, and Bayreuth is I think a town in Germany, and it's I don't know, he's inspired by the town or whatever, that's why he writes this. This is Klaus Schulze's first true Berlin School album. And it's got all the touch points of the Tangerine Dream stuff. Now keep in mind he's done this, 2 years after Phaedra comes out. So Phaedra comes out in 74, Rubicon comes out in early 75. So 2 records have already come out before Klaus Schulze puts out Time Wind. And I do think at this point he starts to become derivative. I think that he's heard Phaedra. I think he's heard Rubicon. He still can't afford the Moog. He ends up getting a digital sequencer that he ends up using in his home studio. And I really do think at this point he's kind of just ripping off his buds, Edgar and Christoph. And I would even go so far to say that I think that this album isn't. And I'm going to get panned by the Kraut heads out there. The Berlin School guys are going to be like, "No, okay. Klaus Schulze,
we got your back,
genius." But I just think that he's not really doing anything like significantly different from. And I would even go so far as to say that his use of melody and his melodic sensibility is really couched in the same kind of stuff that Tangerine Dream were doing at this time. I don't think you put on Phaedra next to Time Wind, and you'd think they're the same band.
Right.
I don't know. What was your thought, Helio, when you were listening to it?
No, I mean, I really liked. I did love the Quadraphonisch Symphony for Orchestra. I thought that one was really interesting. But yeah, Bayreuth Return. I mean, it didn't stand out because to your point, it's very similar in style to what's going on with Tangerine Dream, and then having that time context now kind of gives it even more perspective of it's good. You did the thing that everybody else is doing. Good for you, and it sounds unique. But it's not overly standing out to me.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at too. Now the standout track for me from Klaus Schulze is the next one, and that is called Crystal Lake. It's off of his album Mirage, and at this point I feel like he really hits his stride. Melodically, he's started to drift away from some of the melodic touch points that he's kind of, I feel like, is derivative of the earlier Tangerine Dream stuff. And honestly, I feel like, and I haven't seen anything like the what's his name? He did The Fog, the movie The Fog, and he did Halloween. John Carpenter? John Carpenter. John Carpenter. I think John Carpenter is hearing some of this Klaus Schulze stuff from 77, and that's where he's getting some of his influence. I know in a lot of John Carpenter interviews he talks about Tangerine Dream, but we're gonna listen to this track Crystal Lake, and if it's not a dead ringer for the Halloween soundtrack, and honestly better recorded than John Carpenter's, it has this kind of crystalline sound that I feel is so it's so clean sounding for this era. It almost sounds like it's an FM synth, but the DX7 is still 5 or 6 years away. And yeah, both the melodic sensibility and the tones that he's getting are great. And I mean, if you're into Tangerine Dream, if you're into Klaus Schulze and you haven't heard Mirage, I highly suggest this record. I feel like this is probably the best out of his catalog. So let's throw a little bit of that on. Right? John Carpenter? He's right there.
100%. I mean, listening to that one the first time, not having that thought, immediately it was like, this is total like late 70s, early 80s, like soundtrack music right here.
Oh yeah.
And there you go. Yeah, I mean, nail on the head with John Carpenter connection. I like this though. It's a good mix of kind of like this dark tone to it, but also still finding like the beauty in some of these instruments and everything, and like those just pretty perfect chords, but then you have that really dark sequence going on behind it, or just it could put you a little on edge, I feel like.
Oh yeah. That's definitely my favorite Klaus Schulze track. And I mean, I had thrown this up like earlier, just being like, do we feel like Klaus Schulze deserves his place in the Krautrock canon, or is he just like a derivative of Tangerine Dream? And my feeling is like, by the Mirage period, I think he's earned his spot. I think earlier on, and if he didn't really make it, if he didn't go past like Time Wind, I think I would say he's just kind of like a hanger on for Tangerine Dream. But starting with Mirage, I feel like he really does start to break away.
Yeah, I mean, he seems intertwined with the fabric of that scene, so he is like a big character. But yeah, it takes a little bit for him to find his own unique voice, and I think, to your point, from that point on, you can say he definitely belongs in the canon. But up to that, kind of a copycat a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
All right, so next couple tracks on our playlist, through the Berlin School. The next one is Freakin' Roll by Asherah Temple. We don't have to play this one on the podcast. I'll say, like, listeners out there, check out the Join In album by Asherah Temple if you want to hear more of like the psychedelic era of the Berlin School guys. But I put this on here because I feel like Freakin' Roll it really shows Manuel Göttsching's, his chops, because this has some like really great guitar parts on it. But I think some of the repetitive nature of like the riffing on this is kind of a harbinger for where he's going to go with inventions for electric guitar. And I think, I don't know what would have happened if everything that happened with Kaiser's label didn't, like, if the Kaiser's label hadn't totally fallen apart and all that kind of stuff. I don't know whether he would have continued off into like the psychedelic direction or not. But I think the next track that we have, which is called Echo Waves, off of Göttsching's solo album Inventions for Electric Guitar, it's definitely his first attempt at something in the Berlin School style. I guess like the big question for me in listening to this is he influenced by Tangerine Dream, Klaus Schulze, and so on? This record comes out in '76, so by this time Klaus Schulze has put out Time Wind. Ricochet is out from Tangerine Dream at this point. And is he influenced by that kind of stuff, or is he like thinking back towards his like electronic beat studio days and thinking about Thomas Kessler and kind of like the minimalist composers that he was exposed to in his early days? Or is it just like a kind of like perfect storm of that kind of stuff coming together? I don't know, what do you think?
That's kind of where I landed. Yeah, I think he definitely shows his recent influence with the krautrock stuff and being able to manipulate the guitars into, sequence feels almost, and doing that repetitive nature. But there is plenty of the minimalist, feel to it. So you can definitely see, I think, both influences on his sleeve on it, and I think it makes for a tremendous album. For all the jam tracks and guitar looping I love to do, like I never thought to apply to it in this way. Even, God, this is 50 years ago now this is released, and look at it. I mean, huge album, probably underrated in the guitar hero pantheon, I would say. And yeah, that other album, the Asherah Temple album, amazing playing on that. That dude just he wails.
Yeah, he wails. Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, of the Berlin School stuff, I think this is my favorite record out of those. I think like there's so many facets to it, because it's like he doesn't have access to the sequencer. Kaiser's label's fallen apart. All he's got access to is a 4-track tape machine and a guitar. He wants to kind of get on this, I guess, this ride that everybody else is on with the sequencing stuff, and the performance is incredible. I mean, you got to keep in mind, like, he's not looping on any of this. These are straight 4-track performances. He's only got a 4-track, so he's playing 4 simultaneous tracks where he's like overdubbing himself. And I mean, I think in the whole record, you don't hear him play off by a beat the entire record. He's like, he's in time with the delay. He's in time with the other tracks. And the idea that, like, some of the tracks are like 10 minutes long. He's playing like straight, like 8th note, 16th note grooves in time in 4 tracks for 10 minutes straight. Incredible performance.
Flawlessly at that. Yeah. This is kind of one of those, I think I sent the question to you, like, if you could be in the studio or on the scene for like a day, where would you want to go and observe? Like, I would love to see, him just in the shop doing this. Whether it was just something as simple as like a metronome, whether the man just had like, flawless rhythm and, composition ability where he's listening to these things and overdubbing it as he is. I mean, it's not Trey Anastasio with, the boomerang looper, stacking things up. This guy, it's a 4-track, a couple little bit of effects to color things up, and that's it. It's him, himself, and he.
And the tour at this time would have been awesome as well, because at this time he's touring. It's him and Lul from Agitation Free, and like I was saying before, like Lul is also has crazy chops. So the live tour for Inventions for Electric Guitar, I think it's one synth that they've got that's doing like a droning thing, and then Lul and him are playing like the melodic parts from the record live. I mean, that must have just been incredible to see. And you'd think that, like, no, go ahead.
Is there any footage or media of it that exists?
I mean, like, it just like predates the kind of like music video kind of thing. But there's an interview in, which book is it? It's by it's the Manuel Göttsching biography by Christian Wielden. There's an interview with Lowell in that where you'd think if you were going on tour with this guy, he's like your buddy from back in the day.
Deep Distance, was that the one?
Yeah, Deep Distance. Yeah. That's the book. You'd think you're going on tour with this guy like from back in the day. He's a bud of yours, and you've heard this record, and you've heard the performances. I think if it were me, I'd feel so much pressure to like nail the performances, and knowing how hard it was anyway. And you read this interview with Lowell, and he's like, dude, this is like one of my favorite periods of all time, like doing this tour with Manuel and me. We were just like shredding every date and like just like jamming, and like, so he felt no pressure. Like between the two of them, their chops were so good that they just felt like they could get on stage and just like bang out these tracks and like it was nothing. That's so cool to me as well.
Almost kind of want to hate him in a fun way, like, damn. I mean, if this is easy, and kind of just you're not freaking out about this, like, damn, I wish I had your talent, your state of mind for these things, because nothing about that sounds easy.
No, and like, just based on like their connection to like Timothy Leary and that kind of stuff, I can't help but think they were probably doing it high too, which is crazy.
But maybe he's remembering it differently than it actually occurred, but yeah, at least he has good memories of it.
Not true, yeah, for sure. So let's play a little bit of Echo Waves from Inventions for Electric Guitar. that last part, oh my god.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to play that
thought.
deep part, like with the delay, and then the other guy has to go
Right,
like
right.
with the delay in time.
I mean, and even, down to like the percussive, guitar thing underneath it all. I mean, there's just so much clever layering in there to use the instruments kind of outside of the traditional purposes. Those lead parts, I mean, yeah, you plug those in on a synth with that kind of tone. I mean, I wouldn't be able to spot much of a difference. They nail it, and so machine-like, even though it's guitar, guitarist, human playing and everything going on. But yeah, it always makes me think too of like Buckethead stuff. There's a couple of tracks he has like that where he's really harnessing the clean with the delay and just kind of building rhythms out of that, and just using the delay in a clever way, and not just for big stadium feel. Like, let's actually use this as a tool for rhythm.
Yeah. All right, let's jump one more track ahead. The next one is it's the track Deep Distance, from Göttsching's record as Ashra, like towards the end of the 70s, after his best friend Hartmut Enke. Hartmut Enke was Manuel Göttsching's best friend growing up. He was in all of the early iterations of Ashra Temple. He went a little off the rails during the Timothy Leary period, and decided to quit music forever. He never came back to jam, never even joined up in any of the late period Ashra Temple reunion tours. There's a tour way later where Manuel Göttsching and Klaus Schulze play together, either the late 70s or early 80s, and Hartmut isn't part of that either. So after he leaves, and after Kaiser's labels crash, he does kind of re-emerge under the name Ashra, and he produces this record called Deep Distance. He produces a record called New Age of Earth, and the big track from that is called Deep Distance, and it's his first Berlin School record. At this point, he has signed to a new label. He's gotten off of Kaiser's label, and he's gotten a good advance. I forget if he signs to Brain or if he signs to Virgin, but at any rate, he gets one of those a big advance from the new thing, and he buys a bunch of new equipment. I think he's also doing some movie soundtracks at this time as well that he's getting paid well for, and he's able to afford a synthy and some other stuff, and he really wants to produce his first electronic album, and he does an amazing job. I mean, for all of the references that Tangerine Dream gets for Phaedra and Rubicon, and certainly the movie soundtracking kind of folks, like John Carpenter, for example, always talk about Tangerine Dream as an influence. The guys that talk about Ashra and Manuel Göttsching as an influence in context of the electronic scene are all ambient and techno and house guys are deeply into Manuel Göttsching. So you'll hear really often the Orb mention Manuel Göttsching as a huge influence for him, and not just the later record E2 E4, which is a kind of proto minimal techno album, but he talks about New Age of Earth as well. And I think there's something that Göttsching captures on New Age of Earth that even Tangerine Dream and Klaus Schulze and the contemporaries don't capture. There's a melodic sensibility to this record that is really unique and sounds a lot more like later New Age stuff, like a kind of Suzanne Ciani kind of sound, or not. I don't want to say, maybe the melodic sensibility of Enya, but not the kind of composition of Enya.
Sure.
In a good way.
Yeah.
I know some people might be rolling their eyes at an Enya record, but there's Deep Distance and New Age of Earth, great proto ambient record, really good production, really good melodic sensibility. Yeah, what were your thoughts like in the transition? Because I know like you're a big guitar guy, so like, were you still into the New Age of Earth record?
Definitely. I just went into this with an open mind that this is still the same musician that made that guitar sound, and this is just his ideas, bore out in a different way. And I loved it as well. And then thinking of these albums as kind of like the birthplace of the ambient textural music, techno, all those things, like it definitely gave it a cool place in history for me, and just thinking like, okay, if we're starting here, this is going to be a fun ride, because these aren't exactly like slouch albums at all. They're very cool, they're very, very good.
Yeah. I think, yeah, we don't have to play this track on the podcast. We'll share over the playlist. And we'll kind of like zoom through the next couple of these. The next track on the playlist is E2 E4, which is both like the name of, it has like some subtitles for the track, but it's basically like an hour-long track that Manuel Göttsching released in the very early 80s, like 81. He recorded it in the late 70s as just like a jam that never got released, and then put it out later just because he thought it was cool. And this is like very often cited as like the very first minimal techno record. Mm-hmm. And it, again, the Orb, I think there's I forget what the other techno producer's name is. There's another guy that like talks about this like very frequently. Carl Craig is like a minimal techno producer that often talks about E2 E4 and the influence on him. And this actually ended up being like huge for Manuel Göttsching as well, from like a financial standpoint. An early minimal techno group called Sueño Latinos, they basically sample E2 E4 on their record Sueño Latino, which is a top 10 techno record like in the late 80s, early 90s, and is like a huge club hit at the time. So that's something that like kind of cements his place in like electronic music, really, more or less.
Does he get that comeuppance, so to speak, to being kind of the birth point of techno, or is it kind of everybody fighting over it a little bit? This guy did it, that guy did it. I mean, it sounds like from E2 E4, this is definitely a direct, like, straight line into that genre and that sound. So is he given his flowers?
It's hard to say, right? I mean, like, when people talk about minimal techno and like the birthplace, and even Kraftwerk says this, is like the birthplace of techno is Detroit, right? The like early like black producers in the Detroit techno scene. And I don't think that's untrue necessarily. I mean, like that, like true, like bass drum driven style, definitely came out of Detroit. But I do think that like the fact that somebody like Sueño Latinos is sampling it, Carl Craig is referencing it, the Orb is referencing it. I do think that he's recognized as like an early innovator in that style. But yeah, I mean, you don't hear Florian Schneider, talking about Manuel Göttsching, which is kind of weird because you'd think that like, they grew up in the same scene, that he would have recognized that. But then again, the guys from Kraftwerk were always kind of like tight-lipped anyway.
Yeah.
You don't really hear Ralph or Florian talk about that kind of stuff. Certainly, like the records have like Detroit, like in some of the like live records or whatever. But even like Ralph and Florian in interviews very rarely talk about influences.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like it has that influence, and it's. I don't know, walking away from this, if I'll think of him more as like that's the layering guitar guy that is just amazing, or that's kind of grandpa of techno, so to speak. I mean, kudos to the guy. Like he reinvents himself multiple times with different sounds and musical ideas, and it's incredibly impressive. Yeah.
Super cool dude. Yeah. And probably like the most versatile of that crew. We got two more tracks for the playlist. Second to last is Michael Honig's Departure from the Northern Wasteland. This is a great Berlin School record. I think it belongs in like the pantheon of the top 10 Berlin School records, along with Ashra's New Age of Earth, along with Rubicon, Phaedra, and Klaus Schulze's Time Wind. It is a later record. It's the last of the Berlin School guys to put out a Berlin School record. Michael Honig, unfortunately for him, took a very, very long time to find his feet. He played as the keyboard player in Agitation Free very early on, and did the whole Middle East tour that the Agitation Free guys did. He's on the first two Agitation Free records, which are both fabulous, though are not anything close to Berlin School. He tours with Tangerine Dream. He's on the Australian tour. There's a crazy story about Peter Baumann disappearing for the Australian tour and them having to recruit Michael Honig to go on the tour with them. So he briefly is in Tangerine Dream. Though,
you ever figure out why he disappeared or what happened there?
Yes. And this is a very, very similar story to what happened to Michael Caroli for the Top of the Pops episode for Can. He decided to go on vacation. They had some downtime before the Australian tour, and he decided to go on a trip, I think also to the Middle East. I forget if it's like Afghanistan or Iran or something. He went to like a Middle Eastern country, and it just like took him a very long time to get back. He didn't anticipate what was going to happen, like with like, some of the border security kind of stuff and things like that. And he gets stuck. I think it's Afghanistan. I think he gets stuck in Afghanistan and is unable to get back in time to leave for the tour. And what's crazy is like even his wife doesn't know where he is. Like he's like literally off the map.
Oh wow.
And but yeah, he ends up being totally fine.
Definitely time to recruit somebody at that point. If even the missus can't find him, like you better get on with this.
Yeah. And they liked him. Like they like Michael Honig. They're all very like complimentary of him in the book. But Peter Baumann was somebody that had been playing with him for years, and they couldn't kick him out of the band for going on vacation. He collaborates with Klaus Schulze on an unreleased record called Time Wind before the actual Klaus Schulze Time Wind record comes out. And then he also he helps Manuel Göttsching mix down New Age of Earth. Honig has like a really nice home studio at this time. And with Kaiser's studio was no longer having access to Dieter Dier's studio, he ends up going to Koenig's to kind of mix down the record.
So definitely a player throughout the whole scene, yeah.
Yeah. So like everybody knows him, and he's well liked, but he never really found his footing in another band, with the exception of Agitation Free. So by the time 78 rolls around, he's like, well, I'm just going to take a hack at this as a solo artist. It does an incredible job. He should be mentioned, he is, so far as I know, the first person in print to coin the term Berlin School. He does it in Synapse magazine in 1978. He's doing a promotional interview with Synapse in 78, and they're basically telling him like, hey, like this record sounds like Tangerine Dream, it sounds like Jean-Michel Jarre. Do you guys have influences that would be similar, such that you would have come up with a record like this? And he says, well, I came from the Berlin School of Electronic Music. And that's essentially where the genre is coined with Michael Honig in Synapse magazine in 78. So it's a little tidbit for you if you're curious.
So you mentioned this is kind of the tail end of the movement. Is this like the end of the Berlin scene, so to speak? I mean, obviously there's plenty of Tangerine material that comes out after the fact. There's plenty of other artists inspired by it, but in the true traditional sense, is this kind of like the cutoff?
Yeah, and it's because of what happens with Tangerine Dream, more or less. Certainly, like Klaus Schulze continues to produce Berlin style records like through his entire career. I mean, he never really veers away from it. But in 78, 79, Tangerine Dream puts out their album Cyclone, which is like it's a lyrical kind of prog driven record. So it's Edgar Froese singing on it. It's I don't know if you've listened to it, Helio, but in my opinion,
yet. No, I'm intrigued though.
It's fairly terrible, in my opinion. It is not a highlight of their catalog, and I think like that's the end of the Berlin School with them, because as Tangerine Dream kind of drifts away from that style, I think Klaus Schulze ends up being the only kind of person to stick with it, and honestly, like as the technology gets better, people kind of take it in different directions, and I think that's a great transition to like the last song on the playlist, which is Harold Grosskopf's "So Weit So Gut" from his album Synthesist. And I put this on here. It's never considered true Berlin School. The album Synthesis comes out in 1980. It has all the touch points of Berlin School. You know, it's got great sequenced melodies, really cool like crazy sound effect stuff going on. It's largely instrumental, but what separates it is it has live drums. Harold Grosskopf was originally the drummer in a Hamburg-based band called Wallenstein, or Wallenstein, maybe Wallenstein, and he plays drums in all of like Dieter Dierks' studio sessions. So he's on like all the Cosmic Couriers records. He's on Tarot, and all that kind of stuff. And when he decides to put out his solo record in 1980, he wants to play drums on it, you know, obviously.
Yeah.
And this record is, to me, like, this is a direction that Berlin School could have gone in, right? The whole record is fabulous. Like, the first track is great, but it's, you know, there's a something to be said for, like, if you took this record and, like, there's another album by another, like, early prog band from Germany. Their keyboard player, synth player, her name is Dorothea Raux. She puts out a record as like a solo record called Deutsche Wertarbeit, which means like German quality. And it's very similar in style to Harold Grosskopf's record. It's not live drums, it's a drum machine, but it's more like rhythmic. But it has a lot of this kind of like the instrumentation and the synthesizer stuff is way more melodic and interesting than a lot of stuff that you're getting in the earlier Berlin School world, in the same way that like Harold Grosskopf's record is. And it does beg the question, like, why wasn't this considered like the next step for Berlin School, or why didn't anybody else go in this direction? There's only a couple records that like do this, where it's like live drums and sequencing without singing. And yeah, it's a bummer that nobody else went in this direction. And I almost feel like it's because it didn't really fit into any genre, right? Like,
right.
Deutsche Wertarbeit at the very least like fits into like the Krautrock general school. She's doing something very similar to like what Harmonia is doing. But Harold Grosskopf, I think, is just in a league of his own, playing live drums with some of the sequence stuff, which is a talent in and of itself. Like, there's a reason why Grosskopf was the go-to studio drummer for Dieter Dierks.
Yeah, if you're keeping time with machines like that, then
yep.
Yeah, come on in.
Yeah, let's play a little bit of that, of So Weit So Gut by Harold Grosskopf.
Yeah, you really make an interesting point about like where it could go, where it could have gone. You know, the compositions are so amazing by themselves, but yeah, if you started folding more and more stuff into it, you really could have some interesting things out there. And I wonder at times, you know, like hearing the drums there, like my initial thought, of course, is, oh, what kind of guitar part would go on the top of this? Okay, well, now is it too much rock? Is it too much of one thing? Because I went with So maybe that's some of the trepidation is all of a sudden, we go from this, Berlin school sound to, okay, I have live drums. Okay, I'm adding a guitar on it. Am I just Pink Floyd? Am I just rock and roll at this point? So I don't know. But yeah, I think there's probably a universe out there where this keeps evolving and there is a good middle ground to have a unique sound going on.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I just wish some other people, picked up that Harold Grosskopf record and ran with it. I feel like, unfortunately, like as you go into the 80s, stuff just gets like more and more cheesy, right? Like you've got the kind of like 80s pop sound that kind of dominates until you finally like run into post-punk. And then stuff starts to kind of come back to starts being cool again, if you will. That's not to say that I don't like some like 80s pop stuff, but I feel like for whatever reason, you never really hear a lot of that kind of like jammy Berlin School driven stuff later into the 80s that doesn't have like some like goofy singing. And maybe there is. I mean, maybe some of the comments on the podcast will lead me in a good direction.
I mean, hey, if anybody out there has something contrary to that and can send us in the right direction, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that covers us for the playlist. I don't know. What are your other thoughts like in going through the Berlin School? Like I know like this is pretty fresh territory for you, Helio, and that this is like one of your first deep dives into the genre. What thoughts came to mind as you were kind of digging in?
Very inspired hearing it. I think the thing I always come back to with Krautrock in general is that it is so diverse, and the musicians in it are well trained, talented, and I love this early fosteраtive culture, where people setting up, the Beat Studio and the Zodiac to encourage these guys to play, not to profit off them, not to, like School of Rock, come in and shell out your money and you're going to learn how to play somebody else's stuff. We want you to come up with original ideas and give you access to the equipment. And, one of the things I struggle with is the idea that like, I wish there was more of that in the country, the world today, where it's, okay, you've played, I'll take myself for instance, I've played trombone all through high school, but where was that moment of like, okay, well here's another instrument, go bang around on it, go play with it, go learn. We're so eager to step in and play the stuff that's already been done, I think, in music education and in, teaching our kids instruments, that sometimes we forget that idea of how can you be original with it? What sounds can you get out of it? Where do you want to go with this? And yeah, just kind of the genre as a whole, hearing these guys with there's no real history on these instruments to compare to say like, this is how you have to sound. This is what you do with it. And what they came up with, it's just super inspiring. And all these guys went in different directions. They did find some commentary with, territory with the sounds, but at the same time, tons of original ideas came out of this. How to use the sequencers, how to use the synths, how to use the studio. I mean, there's just so much to explore here.
Yeah, and especially if you widen the net a little bit, knowing that like Hans Joachim Redelius and Konrad Schnitzler came out of the same Berlin scene. Schnitzler like single-handedly develops like industrial, right? He's making all these kind of like metallic, crazy sounds that eventually inspire bands like Throbbing Gristle, and noise bands like Merzbow. So they're, he's going very much in like the noise music concrete direction. You've got the melodic sensibilities of, all the Berlin School guys. Yeah, it's a huge bummer that this kind of like music education investment isn't something that's more valued today. I mean, like in reading about the Beat Studio, and in particular, like some of the Thomas Kessler, like sadly, passed away, a number of years ago. but a lot of people wrote like very, very kind things about him coming out of that. And there's even like, I think in Berlin, like where the old Beat Studio is, they put up like a little plaque to kind of commemorate like his influence on music and stuff like that. And just the idea that like it wasn't even some sort of like patron, right? Like some guy that was part of like a local adult orchestra petitioned the Bureau Council to put money into this. Like the city of Berlin paid for a bunch of very cool young kids to get together and jam and develop community and learn together. And they paid the salary of a really cool guy in Thomas Kessler who exposed them to a lot of really interesting avant-garde concepts. That thing just like doesn't exist anymore. Can you imagine?
And you look at the tree of, things where it branches off from all those ideas and sounds that were discovered, like music would look completely different if, that whole thing hadn't happened. I mean, but here we are with looking back on, kind of these ground zero moments for these genres. And this is somebody taking their time just to work with, young dudes on gear.
Yeah. I mean, I really hope that something like this can pop up, that somebody's inspired by that in the near future. I mean, I think the world is a little different, obviously, like, but that's not to say that like, the funding the arts isn't cool and that. Right.
Well, I love
somewhere like the United States.
I don't know if they still do this, but the Canadian government kind of fosters this a little bit, where artists / bands can apply for grants, so that way they can focus on like making their art as a job. And do they always make it? No, but Canada as a country says, hey, we have plenty of talented people in here, like let's encourage them to do this. The United States, I mean, here on January 25th, 2026, there's a number of things we could talk about, but yeah, it doesn't seem to be a priority in that sense.
Okay, so at that moment, Helio's mic cut out, but he did ask a really awesome question while his mic was muted. And he basically asked, if you could do a modern day Cosmic Couriers and bring together some guys for an epic full moon jam, who would be some names you would bring? Any genre or style, LSD optional, but strongly encouraged. So from here, we'll jump back in, I'll answer, and then Helio will come back in off of mute shortly after that. Oh my god, dude. That is a great question. Who would I pick? I don't want to go... I feel like there's this like way, you could go in this direction of like creating like another Yardbirds takeoff, but I just don't feel like they would go in that direction, that you would end up with like psychedelic sounds. Here's what I would do. I would take YMO, all three guys, all Japanese guys. So we're going YMO. We're gonna do drummer from YMO, Harunomi Hosono from YMO on bass, and Ryuichi Sakamoto on keys. We're gonna grab Masayoshi Takanaka of like Breezin' fame, Rainbow Goblins, because he's got kind of like a jazz influence, but I feel like he could get psychedelic if you put him in like with Harunomi Hosono. I feel like he would get out there. And then to really like set things in a bonkers direction, grab the guitar player from the band High Rise, the late 80s, early 90s, like psychedelic freakout band. I think his name is Munehiro Narita. I think he would really push them to get pretty wacky. I think that's the direction I would go, because you'd have a real solid like rhythm section with Harunomi Hosono and the guy from the drummer from YMO. And then I think Narita would force the other guys to get pretty psychedelic. I think all but Harunomi Hosono is dead now. This is Future Kyle editing now. Masayoshi Takanaka is not dead. He is still alive and he's on tour. So if you want to go see him, check him out. He's touring the United States. Harunomi Hosono is also still alive. The other three guys have since passed away. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay, back to the show. But that would be, I think they were all around in like the early 80s. It's a possibility for that to have happened. they would have all been alive at the same time doing cool stuff. Yeah,
I got
that's
some
my list.
homework though to
who would you
listen
pick?
to some new names there. For me, it's funny you mentioned the Japanese thing because immediately I went to Boris and was thinking like,
Yeah, all right.
Wata, on guitar would be such a big sound, and having seen them, like, yeah, it feels like they are just up there jamming. But I mean, I know it's all very, for the most part, very well composed. But
Yeah.
the range of sounds that comes out of her guitar is just incredible. I think about Dylan Carlson from Earth as well, as another person
Sure.
that I would put in there. If I wanted to have vocals, but maybe not singing, I've heard Mike Patton do some incredible just usage of his voice, his throat, his mouth, just to provide, maybe it's a rhythm that he's looping, and spitting out type things. So there's probably different outside the box ways to look at that. And then I'd probably go with a guy, Zach Hill. I don't know if you're familiar with him. From, from Hella
Hella?
and Death Grips.
Yeah.
There's nothing the man can't play. And, you talk about having that solid rhythm core. If you had him back there, like, he's going to read the room and go any direction they want to go, and he can pull it off. And if they want to just let him cut loose, like, he's going to blow your socks off. Another guy, having seen it, it's just kind of like, this guy's not human. He's like part octopus or something like that. It's insane.
Yeah, I saw him. I don't. Do you know Marnie Stern?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he toured with her on like her first tour with a live band. Because I think he's on her record, the first record, like in advance of Broken Arm, and I was like, that was the first time I've seen him live. I hadn't seen him play with Hella prior to that, but I was like, oh my god, this guy, like, how is he achieving this?
Right. Right.
Yeah, it was incredible.
He's doing like 30-second note bass notes on one foot instead of like needing both pedals, and it's just like, dude, you're a cheat code, man. This is ridiculous. If we're playing Rock Band or guitar here, you're on my side.
Oh yeah. All right.
Yeah,
so your band is, so it's
I think I need
Wata?
an organ. Yeah, Wata.
Oh, yeah, you need a keys guy. Yeah.
I need a keys guy. And I'm having a hard time thinking of one at the moment. For somebody bringing the question, I should have prepared a little bit more on that front.
No worries.
Yeah, but no, the one I maybe go to is like John Anderson from Yes. Because like,
Yeah.
he's going to be a completely different sound from some of those other guys in that school. And he's been through the prog, the psych stuff. So he's
True.
almost kind of the veteran there. And I think it's just kind of one of those like, throw him in the room and see what happens type moments. There might be moments where he's just like, what is going on in here? This isn't a band. This isn't Yes. This isn't what I signed up for. And then there might be moments of like total synergy and breakthrough where they're making some awesome sounds. So yeah, John Anderson, Wata, Dylan Carlson, on a guitar / bass type role, maybe handling the low end. Zach Hill, and then Mike Patton on Weird, or there was a Frank Zappa. He would introduce sometimes Captain Beefheart at the end of some of their shows as Captain Beefheart on saxophone, vocals, and weirdness. And it's like, sometimes you need that guy up there shaking things up and making it weird.
Yeah, I think like Pow Artak, like Pink Floyd stuff.
Right, exactly.
Or like Dillinger era Patton stuff.
Yeah, there's I don't know if you've heard it. There's a bootleg. I used to have it. There was a project called Moonraker, and it was just Buckethead and Mike Patton in a live setting. And every once in a while, they'd get DJ Qbert in there, like spinning and like putting down beats. So Mike Patton might go breakdancing, or he'd come up with a little vocal melody and loop it and apply effects. And Buckethead's doing his thing, and Qbert's doing scratch solos and beats and everything behind it. It's just like, okay, again, this is what happens when you let guys just cut loose. Have fun making sound. Don't worry about making a pop hit.
Where was that?
I want to say New York.
New York, yeah,
in a club there. I'm gonna have to look up more and see if I can find it and send it to you, because it's one of those like, okay, this is something definitely like that needs to happen a little bit more.
I feel like there were things like that just like happened in New York. When I was in college, end of college, there was a date in Brooklyn. I forget what the venue was called, but it was Dillinger Escape Plan was opening for Old Dirty Bastard. It was a bizarre show.
Yeah, the crowd on that's got to be a fun one.
It was very strange, but fun. Yeah. There were people that I ran into there that were like that. I had a buddy from Pittsburgh that was going to Pittsburgh University. I was going to University of Delaware, so I had a friend that was from Brewster that had heard about the show, and he's like, "Oh, dude, we're going back to New York. We're going to see this thing."
Yeah.
So I drove up to New York with him, and then my buddy had driven in from Pittsburgh. Like, dude, I could not miss the show. That's Dillinger opening for ODB. Like, how?
You do not know what you're going to get out of something like that. I mean, it's just the recipe for fun, though. So I'm curious too. You know, a lot of the talk with this is about some of the really cool early gear, like the Moogs and the synthesizers and the sequencers. If you had the opportunity, assuming it was in working condition, to like monkey around for a day with one of these pieces of gear, what would you want to go for? Like, some of those oscillator machines scare me, hearing how temperamental they are, but like a day, if I had a tech to set it up for me, like, okay, I could have fun with that for a day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I've had a chance to mess around with, we went to, when I was like maybe in college, we went to Moog Fest down in Carolina when the Moog factory was still there. I think they've since moved it, but at the time they had like the Keith Emerson prototype thing in there.
Oh, cool.
I messed around with that a little bit. You weren't allowed to patch it. You could just like play the keyboard, but and I've never played a real Mellotron. I have like just in my home studio it's called an Optagon, which is like an optical disc version of that.
Okay.
So rather than using the tapes, it uses like a proto like CD kind of thing, but it's like
cool.
huge, like a laser disc size.
Yeah.
And you put it into like this little, and it has like vocal samples and other kinds of samples and stuff like that. I think what I'd really want to mess around with is honestly like the Moog 3P with the sequencer.
Yeah.
And only because like it finds its way into like everybody's closet at some point. You know, Florian Frick gets one in like 1969. It finds its way into the Tangerine Dream stuff. Klaus Schulze has one at some point. Like, they're all messing around with it, and it doesn't really fall out of favor until way later. And also, like, I have like some older 70s stuff. Like, I have the Octave Cat back there. It's like a like mid 70s monophonic synth, and it does occasionally like fall out of tuning, not like crazy. But I'd be really curious to see like how temperamental it really is. Now, obviously, I'm not touring with it. I'm not like taking it to Australia or doing anything crazy like that.
No custom boxes built for it yet.
Yeah. But it'd be cool to mess around with that and see like how hard it really is to get like consistent performances out of it. I think the other thing that's interesting about that is the early Moog stuff with the oscillators. I know that Robert Moog was very interested in being able to like overdrive the oscillator, and I think like those early Moog instances, there's like the oscillator that sends like the signal, but then there's like an oscillator driver that allows you to like overdrive the VCA. So being able to manipulate that and getting like some of the timbres out of that, I think would be interesting. I've never messed around with that or really I've messed around with like a Moog, like a mini Moog that has like, you can push the oscillator into the VCA on the mixer hard to get some like overdriven saturated sounds. But I'm curious to how that worked in the Moog 3P. It could just be the exact same circuit, but
yeah.
And there's another thing that like is part of the sequencing process on the old Moog 3Ps, where it's got like a sequential switch, so you can get longer sequences as a whole. I've never really messed around with that too much. Like, I have a modular synth, but you know, it's mostly just like oscillators, filters, and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, probably the Moog 3P.
Fun.
How about you? I mean, I know you got a little studio over there.
Yeah, and I'm going to change the answer on our Dream Jam sessions because it kind of jogged my memory. I'm subbing out John Anderson. He's going to hang out on the sidelines and tag in Steven Wilson. Because for me...
Porcupine Tree?
Yeah, oh yeah.
All right.
For me, like the first time I heard him on his Mellotron live, like I knew that was a piece of gear. Like I'm not a piano player, I'm not a keyboard player, but man, that thing is just mesmerizing. The sounds it's capable of, and when you layer it in with the right instrumentation, like it is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think maybe another tangent for another time, or we could talk now.
Why not? Yeah.
The digital VST recreation of these things like is very good. It's very good, but I wonder, does it lose some of the feel and the character? Having it in such a way that it's part of its charm for some of the keys to go out of tune. It's part of the charm to be able to mix and match patches on the fly. I mean, how do you feel about the digital stuff versus the really cool analog tools?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one of those guys that's like deep into the fidelity of it. I don't get into like, I mean, if I just need like a choir sound and I want to like rip off a Mellotron thing, I would definitely like. I have no qualms using like a VST Mellotron. I think the samples sound great.
Yeah,
I don't think they sound like way different than if you were to record them with like a decent microphone. I think it's about like how you want to use it though. If you want to be inspired and you want to come up with something that's like interesting from that, like the one thing, do you know the band Anglagard?
I don't.
They're like a Swedish prog band. They came out in like the maybe mid 90s. I think their first record came out in 96. And they tour with two like original M400 Mellotrons.
Oh wow.
And one of them has a like a cutout in the side where the wheel that spins the tape back is exposed, so that as they're playing it, they can manipulate how fast the tape goes against the heads. And so like being able to do that kind of manipulation where you're manipulating the tape speed and something that's, which you can't really do in the digital version of the Mellotron or even in the VST. Like sure, you could like record it and then mess with like the pitch playback and stuff in Ableton. But I think like that tactile performance aspect of being able to like grab the tape wheel and like slow it down or do whatever. I think there's also something to be said for like, I think in the VSTs now you can set it to like endless loop. But the original Mellotron, the tape distance only went for 7 seconds. So like there was a performance aspect of that where like you couldn't hold the note for more than 7 seconds as you played it.
Right.
That really like put you into a certain like, all right, after 7 seconds I got to switch my note. Then I can come back to it. And then like the tape return function also had like a certain return time. So like you had to wait until the return pulled the tape all the way back before you could get another 7 seconds out of it. So I think those kinds of like limitations put you in a certain mindset that you're not going to get out of the VST. And just think about like, I think that brings us back to the conversation about Göttsching and inventions for electric guitar, right? Like if somebody just threw a Moog 3P at him in 1974 and said like, go ahead, do a Tangerine Dream record, you wouldn't have gotten that, right? Like it was the limitations of him not having money for the studio, not having access to the synthesizers that made him produce such a cool record. So I think sometimes like, as much as I think like from a fidelity standpoint or like sound quality, VST is fine. Don't care about it.
Yeah.
Like, if I just want to get like that like weird like warbly tape saturated vocal choir sound, I'm totally happy to use the VST. But I think there's something to be said like if somebody handed me like a Mellotron with the side cut out, I would make a whacked out like Music Concrete record that I wouldn't be able to produce from VST.
No, I think that's a really good point. I mean, the benefits, we talked earlier about like, let's let these things be accessible to, to kids, to people coming into it. Like, this $99 launch key keyboard all of a sudden can be whatever I want it to be in terms of a, creative outlet. And it's a different paintbrush every week. This week it's a Mellotron. Next week it's, some Yamaha or Korg Triton, whatever I want it to be. And you can't get that in the real world with the cost of some of these instruments. So it kind of breaks down a little bit of the walls of that pay to play idea with music. So I appreciate it from that respect. But I think you're totally right. Like it gives you an 90% snapshot of what the real thing will be without that option to kind of give it its own unique characteristics. Like you can tweak some of the buttons, you can change some of the settings, of course, on the digital, but yeah, you can't have the back open for tape manipulation on a computer. You're just applying another effect later on. So I think it kind of just goes to, like, for somebody like me that just likes recording at home and playing stuff, totally fine, good enough. But if I was ever to be like an aspiring live performer, like, I'd probably want something closer to the real thing.
Good luck tuning that boy.
Yeah, exactly. No thanks.
Yeah, I saw Engelgard at Nearfest in 2003, and the announcer that like introduced them was like, I just want you to know that getting the Mellotrons over here and tuning them was very difficult, so please pay very close attention to Engelgard.
The other performers, that they had a tough time too, but this one in particular, yeah.
The staff took a very long time to tune these stupid tapes.
I loved it. So I guess, wrapping up, my last question to you would be, like, for the beginner, like, we're going to have the playlist posted on there. Where would you go after this?
Ooh, good question.
We've got Berlin. I mean, are there other performers that you think maybe learned from this that kind of connect a little bit? Are there other cities and regions and schools, so to think, that, like, if you like this, you might not like this, but you should hear it?
Oh, deep questions, because I feel like you could go in so many directions. I feel like if you like Berlin School and you like the idea of, like, no drums, the kind of proto-ambient thing, you got to go check out Brian Eno, right? Music for Airports, even like the Cluster Eno collaboration record, which I think is just called like Cluster and Eno. Both of those, all that Eno stuff coming out of this. I don't know that he was like super inspired by the Berlin School necessarily, but he's very much like going in that direction. It's like no drums, and I think Eno had like a 4-part series of like Ambient 1, Ambient 2, Ambient 3, all the way through Ambient 4, and he's collaborating with different people on different records. So I think like Ambient 3 has influence from like Laraji, who's like a good new age composer. I would also say, like, if you like new age as a style, 1,000,000% check out Suzanne Ciani's 7 Waves record, standout record of like new age as a genre, and it does have some like drum machine stuff in it, but it's very much a progression from Berlin School in my opinion.
Sure.
I think, what else is there? I mean, if this is your first podcast, like, listening to us talk about Krautrock stuff, if you haven't gone back and listened to, the more, like, the more traditional Krautrock stuff from, like, the Dusseldorf scene, check out Neu. Neu is incredible, obviously. And
kind of the one that sparked this whole, tangent of ours on the show, actually, too. So
true.
Yeah. Gotta give the love to Neu.
Hollow Gallia is great. Early Kraftwerk, Ruckzuck era, Kraftwerk 1. If you're into Krautrock in general and you want to listen to some stuff like that's like a modern interpretation of that, check out Kosmischer Läufer. It means cosmic runner in German. It's got a cool backstory. Basically, the guy supposedly grew up in East Berlin. He's recruited by the Russian government to create soundtracks for the Olympic runners. I don't think it's true. I think the guy's actually a British guy, and he just has like a great backstory for the project. But it's great, like, modern krautrock stuff. and it's set up in such a way that it's like meant for you to run to. So he's got certain like warm up songs and long distance songs and that kind of stuff, like cool down songs that are all kinds of in different versions of krautrock. Some are more Berlin school in style and ambient and meant to be for cool down, and other ones are more like propulsive and noise styled, meant to kind of get you running in the to the same beat. Another great modern band is called Minami Deutsch. They're a Japanese band. I think they formed somewhere around 2010. They have a couple of records, a couple of more recent records. I think they toured actually in the States maybe last year, 2025, 2024. Great kind of like can style, noise style, rhythmic krautrock stuff. Sometimes with like odd time signatures, but just a great band. And the last one I would recommend would be Stereo Lab. It's kind of a classic 90s krautrock band with some like French influence as well. Yeah, I think those would be three modern ones I would recommend.
The story, that mindset for the running music is kind of brilliant. I'm very eager to check that one out.
Yeah, I think the only problem with that project is that the guy can't tour. He's supposed to be playing this like character from East Berlin, but as like a British man, I don't think he can pull it off. I think he did there was a live album that was released that was like a tribute to Kazmischer Laufer that was actually released by the British guy himself. But I think he only did the one tour and he didn't do any other shows after that.
Yeah, I mean, if the music's there, like, you can drop the character. We'll let it pass. Just give us the music, I think, at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I would love to see him live.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this was the first episode of Recorded on a Podcast with Better Equipment. An absolute joy to be learning and talking more krautrock with our friend Kyle Reiff. Kyle, where else on the internet could we find you? I notice you have some really cool posters behind you. I've got one of yours behind me as well. Let us know, where can we find those?
Oh, sure. My wife and I have a little poster reprint project called Reiff and Vada Repress. We do reprints of vintage concert posters from the krautrock scene of the early 70s, including bands like Can, Neu, and Kraftwerk. You can find us on Bandcamp, and we'll throw a link in the description of the podcast so you don't have to figure out how to spell Reiff and Vada. And if you're still in the mood to check out even more new music after your Berlin School deep dive, check out my band Erie, Indiana. Not expressly krautrock or Berlin School, more of a dream pop shoegaze band a la Dive or Beach House. But yeah.
If you're here listening, chances are you are open to all kinds of music. So yeah, definitely give them a listen there. Make sure to like and subscribe us. We're going to try and have this be monthly, every couple of weeks. Who knows what kind of series. But there will definitely be more to come and more awesome krautrock information thrown our way. Kyle, a treat as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Helio. Take care, man.